Yeah, so let's get to season 9, which I barely remember at all. So I just had to part of it was I think I just missed a few episodes. So I'm going to be very brief on this one. Okay, by this time, Clark has fully embraced being a superhero, and there's even a shot of him atop a building looking down the city, kind of brooding, because at the time, I think every superhero has kind of done this. So he had to check that off his list. He kind of dresses in this black sort of Matrix kind of look, but he has the S symbol on him. Because I swear that symbol has shown up on people's chests, especially Clark's chest, so often that it's about time he finally got down to that, really. It really is. And apparently he's been trying to fly, but just can't seem to get himself to do it. So that has been that's kind of this thing that just kind of keeps showing up, hasn't it? That just Clark doesn't seem to, he knows he can fly, but just doesn't seem to be able to do it. And they really held that off for way too long. So I guess they decided they need another bad guy, so they decided to go with Zod again, but he's kind of like a younger version of Zod, and he shows up in physical form instead of possessing somebody, and he's Major Zod, not General Zod. Make sure you know that. He's got all these Kryptonians from Kandor with him. If you know anything about Kandor, it's like this, it's first introduced as the comics as this city that from Krypton that Brainiac shrank at one point in time and then shoved it in a bottle. And more in modern stories, I actually think the Kandorians were able to completely go to Metropolis. So at the time, Metropolis was full of super beings. And I think the show was trying to emulate more of that kind of modern day story. Because, you know how it is with comics. A story becomes popular and then they try and adapt it as soon as possible. I kind of get the feeling that was happening here. I think it wasn't Major Zod was this big bad that was stalking him through the entire season. I think Clark and he were actually on the same page for a little bit. But I think Zod kind of went a little nuts. I think there's a certain episode where he and his followers start blazing the Zod symbol on popular monuments, which really should have been made more news. I always kind of feel like the things that happen on Smallville, that is the show Smallville, really should be more newsworthy than they actually end up being. I recall an episode in which Martha Kent returns, and she's actually dating Perry White, which, who knew? What's weirder is that she's kind of this behind-the-scenes player. Smallville seemed to be doing this thing where there's always this kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but that secret kind of organization pulling the strings, and I think Chloe was using influence and Martha Kent was losing her influence. I think Martha Kent was becoming this figure called the Red Queen and stuff like that. And Martha seems to have figured out that there's this thing called the Book of Rayo, this disc thing that could send Zod and his crew back to some place that they can live. I don't know. And I think the Zod's crew is trying to turn the sun red or something. I have totally forgotten this season. There is a lot going on with the Justice League aspect of this. Chloe is starting a organization on a big tall skyscraper called Watchtower, where she's trying to getting all these superheroes assembled as kind of a group to work together. And there's even a two-parter episode that has the Justice Society on it, which features a lot of characters from the DC Comics. That was written by Jeff Johns, who's a very famous comic book writer and also a producer. And I don't really remember the episode, but I started watching it the other day, and it's all right, I guess. But very little could save Smallville at this point. Okay, so at some point in time, Lois has been following the story of the Blur, and I think she actually thinks it's Major Zod, but she finds out it's Clark, but she doesn't tell Clark. And keeps that secret the entire season. I think she actually finds that out at the end of the season, now that I think about it. Kind of like Chloe did that for a while. Okay, it's interesting that season 9's its finale starts with a dream sequence where it shows Lois working hard at the Daily Planet. In 2013, which would be 3 years from when the episode first aired, we see a few things. That Lex is running for president in spite of being dead, and she's also calling for Olsen, a character who died last season. So what does this mean? Remember when I said that Martha Kent showed up? She stops by to give a suit to Clark, and it's the super suit. It's clearly Clark's super suit, and we can tell by the look in his eyes and the reflection that we see that. And of course, we're thinking like, is this when he's going to put on the tights? No. Okay, so I think this season accumulates with Clark fighting Zod and the Kandorians on top of a skyscraper. And I think he banishes them all using that Book of Rayo thing. I forget. And even though I just saw the episode, I watched the episode again. I actually really forgot this. Just some plot element is thrown there. Who knows? Clark gets stabbed with a blue kryptonite knife, and I think he falls to the ground, and he's like, I don't know, 50 stories up or something like that. Yeah, you can tell I've pretty much lost interest in the show almost altogether after this. At this time in my life, when this season was airing, I decided to move out of Pullman and try to my fortunes at something else. And we made it to Seattle, but it didn't really work out. So I just found some work online like I was doing before, moved back to Pullman, and it was keeping very busy at this point. I wasn't having any trouble making ends meet after a certain time because I was tech logging like crazy. And at this point in time, Ike decided to move. He left to join his family who were leaving in Atlanta. And let's see, the last time I saw him, and yeah, this is where this story gets a little sad, was in Las Vegas. And this is the last time I physically saw him, but it wasn't the last time I talked to him. So we talked on the phone like all the time. But that was a terrible time for me. It was CES 2010. And I had a problem with my tooth. It got infected and my mouth puffed up, and Ike had his luggage stolen on the trip down, so that made it, but I found a hospital that was willing to treat me there, but wasn't really able to see much of the conference. But so we parted at Vegas airport. I didn't have that feeling, like I feel like I should have had a feeling like, oh no, this is the last time I'm going to see him. I didn't. I felt like I was going to, even though we had no plans to see each other because he was in Atlanta and I was in Washington State, but I don't know. I just kind of felt that way. Anyway, let's get back. All right, now we're at the last season. And recently I decided to watch the entire last season because I had stopped watching Smallville at the time it was airing, season 10. And I only really remembered like watching maybe a few episodes. And the best part about when a show has its last season is they can pretty much start wrapping up things. They don't have to like do the thing that most shows do where they, in fact, what Smallville actually did for several seasons, where they kept things going, but they didn't really introduce serious plot elements because they knew they could easily end the show. Okay, so season 10 starts off right where we left off Clark, as in he fell off a building. Well, Lois comes up to him and yanks out that blue kryptonite knife, and Clark just revives. Since Lois knows who Clark is, I think she just kind of takes him away so Clark can naturally assume that, and I actually don't even remember. Okay, it seems like the big bad of the season is none other than Darkseid. It's kind of appropriate as he tended to show up in finales in the animated series like the Justice League Unlimited and the Superman animated series of the late 90s. Darkseid is apparently trying to get his planet of Apocalypse to take over. And I don't really want to explain the concept of Darkseid in the Fourth World, so if you don't know what that is, kind of look that up and check it out. Yeah, I think that on episode 2, Clark starts wearing, since he's like the red, blue blur, he starts wearing this jacket that has like the S symbol on the back. It just kind of happens. There isn't really, it's the closest thing he has to a super suit, but even though Martha gave him one in the last season, that super suit literally ends up on ice in the Fortress of Solitude. I don't even remember when they rebuilt that thing, seriously, because it fell in season 7. Okay, then there's this one episode where Lois gets possessed by the spirit of Isis, and this is back when you could say ISIS and not think ISIS terrorists. Clarkson's, I think this is actually the episode where Clark tells Lois his secret. And it feels better late than never, but yeah, I mean, come on. Pete learned it, Chloe learned it, Lana, Lex, and finally Lois. Anyway, Tess ends up trying to clone Lex because, I don't know, she just wants to do that. One of the clones ends up being Connor Kent, who Clark is training up to be Superboy, like the one that's in DC now, that exists at the same time with Clark, not the Superboy that eventually became Superman in earlier comics. It's maybe this was an attempt at a backdoor pilot with Connor Kent. I don't know. Oh yeah, there's this constant subplot of super vigilantes that are going to be outlawed, so they want some kind of vigilante registration act to stop them. So I guess the world of Smallville is kind of starting to get used to the world of superheroes in it, and Ollie actually comes out as Green Arrow, doing his best Robert Downey Jr. coming out as Iron Man impersonation. In fact, the scene where he admits he's Green Arrow looks just like that scene in Iron Man. Way too much like that scene in Iron Man. Totally suspiciously like that scene in Iron Man. Oh yeah, then there's this weird episode where Clark finds himself in an alternate timeline. Not the first time. I actually think there's a few times in which I've kind of discussed this, or actually I don't even think I've discussed the episodes where this happened. But in this alternate timeline, Lionel found Clark instead of the Kents. And in this universe, Clark Luthor is Ultraman, and Clark has to stop him twice in 2 different episodes. By the way, the Lionel from the alternate universe comes in and wants to see how it ends. Get it? Because the show is ending. Alright, I might as well how it gets to the end with a 2-part episode. The finale starts out with Chloe reading a book about Smallville to her young son. The story is about how Superman left Smallville, but I don't really get it because how is this book that she's reading the story that we're going to see right now? Because in order for that to be true, we'd have to see Clark as Superman, and then this book would be revealing certain information. It doesn't make any sense. And there's like this kid has this, and you're wondering like who's the father of this kid, and there's like a bow and arrow set in this kid's closet. So is it Ollie? Is Ollie still alive? I don't know. That was like meant to be a framing device. Anyway, so Darkseid's invasion starts as the huge planet of Apocalypse is seen like at Earth's orbit, and when Clark faces Darkseid, he flies for the first time. And this show has a lot of flashbacks to previous episodes, and I have to admit that I did kind of start to tear up at this because I was remembering how great Smallville was. And when Clark returns to the fortress, he puts on the tights and flies to save the world, and he kind of just, I don't know, pushes Apocalypse out of the way because I guess he's that strong. Okay, the good news is Michael Rosenbaum did return as a fully revived Lex clone. And there's a dialogue between him and Clark, which really made me miss earlier seasons of the show, and then I realized this is exactly what it was missing when they start talking to each other. This Lex kills Tess Mercer, who we find out in this season is some sort of long-lost sister of Lex. That plot thread made no sense. I don't even know why it was added there. It doesn't add anything to the story that she's related to the Luthors. It doesn't even make any sense considering how the Luthors were always so in an iron grip of each other. So the fact they just let one go to an orphanage just made no sense to me. And speaking of things that don't make sense, Tess shoots this Lex clone with this shot that makes him forget everything. So he doesn't remember that Clark and Superman are the same. I guess Clark becomes Superman. I don't even think they say the word Superman on that final episode, now that I think about it. But I could be wrong. The show does end with Lois at the Daily Planet, and Perry White is being heard yelling Great Caesar's Ghost in the background. I'm assuming that's the Michael McKean version that we saw, that Perry White. We also see Jimmy Olsen, who's played again by Aaron Ashmore, who shows up because we all know the real Jimmy didn't die. That was his older brother, so now the younger brother has grown up to work for the Daily Planet. You get it? Yeah, and then there's an emergency that Clark has to respond to. And then he does the thing, and he's got the S under his chest, and they play the John Williams Superman theme. And that is the end of Smallville. And honestly, I have to admit, it was probably the ending I was kind of expecting. But here's the thing. Smallville was only based as Superman as a foundation. And when it was doing its own thing, like that whole friendship between Clark and Lex as kind of these pals that had each other's secrets, that was when it was interesting. And then it just suddenly just kind of became the Superman story. And I kind of felt like you could actually put the setting of the last scene in season 10 in any Superman story and it would work. And which is, so in other words, like, yeah, it became Superman. Okay, final thoughts about Smallville. I'm told there is a comics continuation series. It lasts about 19 issues. I haven't actively collected comics since the 1990s, so I know that comics that are spawns of TV series and other movie franchises, they don't last long. So, yeah. There was apparently another limited series in 2015, and, maybe that did better. Maybe that wrapped up some of the whatever they were doing in the comics, which I'm actually told introduced Batman and Wonder Woman to the Smallville universe properly. Tom Welling did reprise his role as Clark Kent because after Smallville was over, the CW did a whole bunch of superhero series that took place in the Arrowverse, which had Arrow and Flash and other ones. I think Supergirl eventually became part of that. Yeah, so let's see. Arrow did a whole thing on their shows called Crisis on Infinite Earths, which had Tom Welling reprise his role as Clark Kent. And here's the thing about Tom Welling. I always liked the way he played Clark. He played Clark very serious. Clark wasn't really the type to make quips or jokes and smiled very rarely, but when he did, it was usually born out of a genuine gladness. I can understand that Clark probably had to grow up in a world where he couldn't be himself, and I actually think the character that Tom Welling portrayed as Clark Kent is a realistic form of this. And I have to admit, like, when I first saw Smallville, I always thought it was going to essentially end properly and planned, and then they were going to do some show called Metropolis that would take place in Metropolis based on the foundation they laid in Smallville. And they only kind of did that through Smallville, where Clark was working in Metropolis and something like that. A bit darker take on the Superman thing, but it eventually became, well, Superman. And at the end of the tone feels very light by the time you get to the end of the show, which is not how the show really started out. Still, Tom Welling gave it everything he had for 10 seasons, and I'm actually told that's a record-breaking science fiction number with about 217 episodes. That's something. Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum now host a rewatch podcast called Talkville, which I haven't seen. And I'm going to talk about Michael Rosenbaum now because I really wish he hadn't left Smallville because he was the icing of the cake on that show. He was really a sympathetic character that I loved to watch every time I saw him. And I remember seeing him on a show called Breaking In. And if you ever watched this show, it was crap. And seeing his name on the credits was a surprise because I actually didn't even recognize the character he was playing was Michael Rosenbaum. So it was a definite step down, and he's also in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie as this character named Martinex. And you're going to have to look that up because he is in the background, but he's got so much CG on him that you can't even tell that's Michael Rosenbaum. I think he played Lex so well that I think he just was sort of put in that thing where they typecast you. There are a lot of actors that are like this, that they do one role and they do it so well that people only think of them as that one role, and then they have a hard time getting jobs. I really wish this hadn't happened to Michael Rosenbaum because he really was a good actor. Actually is a good actor. I'm sure he's in other things that I haven't talked about. Yeah. Okay, as for Allison Mack, the character that played Chloe Sullivan, or the actress that played Chloe Sullivan, I keep seeing a lot of things on the internet about a sex cult related to Smallville with her being in that, maybe even, and I don't really even want to even, I know that probably happened, maybe, and I didn't do my research into that. I'm here just to talk about Smallville, the show. Last time I saw Allison Mack in anything was a show called Wilfred, which had Elijah Wood, where he talks to his dog or something like that. Maybe some of you remember that show. Maybe I'll watch that video about Allison Mack and the whole Smallville sex cult thing sometime. But you know what? Maybe I shouldn't even mention it. But I don't know. You know me and truth. I always have to bring it up. As for Erica Durance, I was looking at her resume and I found that she was in a lot of movies that had Christmas in the title. Was she like permanently stuck in Hallmark, whatever? She did a very cool job as Lois Lane. I have to admit, the show did decrease in quality when Lois came on, but I have to admit a lot of that was probably due to just the writing in general. And I think this actress portrayed Lois Lane, who had the whole spunkiness turned up to 11. But I kind of like that about her. It was a kind of different type of Lois Lane, but it was kind of welcome, really. I kind of got used to Lois being there, and I was glad she was added to the cast eventually. Okay, Kristen Kruk. I know I'm probably mispronouncing this. I'm actually told there was one credit sequence they did where they misspelled her last name. She did this movie called Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li, and I'm guessing that was supposed to be some kind of new place to steer her career into movies, but that didn't really work out. She was constantly doing karate and martial arts on the show. Maybe not karate, I don't really, but she was doing martial arts on the show a lot. I remember her constantly beating up bad guys when they got in her way, like that. I don't even know if that was like something on the show, like she learned martial arts or something like that. Maybe she did. I don't know. Okay, I already mentioned John Schneider, who appeared at the cast of Smallville, and several episodes after that, after his character died. The man was already a legend before he was on the show, and I still see him acting still. I checked out his resume, and it's pretty deep. John Glover, the actor that played Lionel Luthor, seems to be stuck in this role where he's playing the big bad villain's father figure. Like he played Sylar's father on the show Heroes, and the villain's father in the movie Shazam. So I kind of feel like he's kind of typecasted as well. But John Glover seems like a really good actor, and but he does seem like he's kind of typecasted to be like this one type of person. But he does it so well that, hey, he was really great to watch in the early seasons of Smallville. Annette O'Toole was also really great to watch on that show. She played Martha Kent really well. I often felt like there were some scenes that she did where she... there's one scene that she did that I didn't really talk about where... Oh, man, I don't know. She was just sharing with Lana how she made a wish, and then Clark came by. And I don't know, something about that moment is just really good. I just don't know why. And it's interesting, though, because Annette O'Toole played Lana Lang in Superman 3. I actually found that out after I was watching Smallville, and then I watched Superman 3, and I like, hey, wait, that's Martha Kent. That's not Lana Lang. I just kind of went like... Anyway, she's had several roles after Smallville, so yeah. As for Oliver Queen, he's Justin Hartley, and you've seen him on This Is Us if you watch that show, and I highly recommend you do, and he's a great actor, and he'll probably have other roles long after that. Okay, as for Sam Jones III, the actor that played Pete Ross, I checked his resume. He was on ER for a little while, and some other roles. The last thing I saw him was on some movie called All Light Will End, which I never even heard of. So, honestly, this guy was pretty good. I kind of like it. They needed more Pete Ross, really. Okay, as for the show's creators, Alfred Goh and Miles Millar, they worked on several projects, and even more after Smallville, or actually even before Smallville, they were developing the film called Shanghai Noon. If you haven't seen that film with Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson, it's very funny and full of great action. Also, while they were doing Smallville, they wrote the screenplay to Spider-Man 2, one of the finest superhero movies ever made. And their most recent project you've probably heard of because it's Wednesday, the Tim Burton Addams Family kind of revamp that's on Netflix. Probably will have another season, and got Jenna Ortega a lot of fame. I think the impact of Smallville is that it'll always have a following because it lasted a long time, and the groundwork is definitely laid for more modern day Superman retellings. And who knows what they're going to be doing, as far as what they're, I don't know what the DC cinematic universe is going to be like, and they're going to have to reintroduce Superman again, so who knows what that's going to be like. I feel like there really should be some sort of Smallville continuation series, like there is on a lot of these series, like Fuller House and whatever, and the show Superman and Lois, which I've watched recently, kind of feels like it could fit in that universe, but not quite. But like I said, Smallville, I think, definitely laid a foundation for more Superman projects to come, because Superman just has to be constantly recreated for the times. That's just how that works. Kind of like James Bond. Okay, for the most part, that's all I got to say about Smallville, but please, there's more to this video because I really want to talk about my friend Ike and how this really relates to it. I mentioned that after I saw Ike in Vegas, that was the last time I physically saw him. Now, we would talk on the phone every few days, and we would talk about stuff we were watching or work we were doing. When he moved back to Atlanta, he was living with his family, and I helped him get doing some work blocking. He even wrote a few articles for TheGeekChurch. Now, at some point in time, his health began to seriously deteriorate. I was told he was in a wheelchair for his last days, but I had no idea that was the case. When we talked on the phone, he did not mention stuff like that. And I'll be very honest when I say I would not know how to comfort somebody who was in that particular situation. I really wish I could remember our last phone conversation. I do remember him asking about his hospital stay, and he was reluctant to talk about it. And so I asked if he just wanted to talk about something else other than that. He said yes, and I just talked about whatever television show or thing that was, might seem trivial, that was just important to me, and that's what we talked about. That was probably the last thing we talked about. I guess I kind of think that maybe that's what he wanted. I'm not really certain. But I don't think he had any foresight that that was going to be our last conversation either, so... Anyway, that's when I knew that Ike had passed away, because he didn't call, and when I called, he didn't pick up. So when a regular phone call didn't happen, I could just sense that something had gone wrong. So before I went to bed, I just decided to do just a recent search of people who had died in Atlanta. And since I used Ike Egwautu's full name, and it's an unusual one, and I got immediate results. And that's how I found out he passed away. Now, in the next few days, several things happened. I informed Ike's friends that he had passed away, and while I was doing that, I received a call from Ike's sister. And I told her that I already knew. She was apparently going through Ike's contact list on his phone and just basically telling people, that he had passed away. So she told me when the funeral would be, and I remember making a promise to Ike that if he died, I would speak at his funeral, and vice versa if that were to happen to me. And then I remember a friend just calling me saying, is Ike really dead? And he just really wanted to know. And I could tell he was distraught, and I could tell he'd been crying. And it suddenly became very real for me that I had to go to the funeral, and I had to go to Atlanta. I was very fortunate to have someone pay for it, the pastor of the church I was going to at the time. And it was hard when I arrived there, as I had to look at Ike's body in the casket, and it just didn't feel right. The Ike I remember was always smiling. He was always glad to see me. And all I could just see was just somebody who was fast asleep and not even happy, blissfully asleep. I just couldn't stand to even be in the same room with that body for so long. At the funeral, I spoke about how Ike and I were friends and how humbled I was that Ike thought of me as his best friend. I didn't think I deserved that honor. I also talked about how we like superheroes and how Ike always liked Spider-Man more, but I was always big into Superman. Spider-Man was always about how being a hero costs you and how no one is really grateful after you save their life. And I always felt that Ike was the hero that no one really noticed, that he should have got more credit for the good he did, because it was a lot. After the funeral, there was that procession. I saw Ike being lowered in his coffin. It was something that I had only seen in movies, but never wanted to see happen to my best friend. And this next part's going to seem really odd, but Ike and I loved watching movies together. And one of the movies that we loved is called Kill Bill, which features a character being buried alive in a coffin. And she escapes because she's able to use this interesting punch technique. So when I saw Ike's coffin being lowered into the grave, all I could think of was hey, Ike, if you're alive in there, then... Yeah, at that point I had to walk away from the crowd. I was actually laughing so much. And unfortunately, Ike's sister was crying, as she should have. I didn't think I cried much initially, because I discovered that crying is something that I don't do easily. even when things are very, very sad. I once spoke at another funeral, and I felt like I had to really force my tears because I felt like that's what I really should have been doing, but it just wasn't right. Anyway, I saw Ike's sister crying again, and there was some guy who came up to her and said something like, "Do not be sad, for your brother is in heaven," that kind of shtick. And I was really upset at the guy, and I really just wanted to pop him one. And I was glad there was actually some other guy there. It was a friend of mine who just kind of told him, like, "Hey, could you, like, knock it off a little?" And here's the thing. I know his message is true, but because I believe Ike is in heaven. The issue is, it's not what was needed at the time. I did cry a few weeks after the funeral, and this is how it relates to Smallville, if you're still here by this point. After I came home from the funeral, a few weeks later, I had a dream that I was Clark on Smallville. And I was looking at Pete Ross, but he wasn't played by the actor. He was played by Ike. And I could see this Pete Ross Ike character was dying, but I could do nothing. Even though it was super powerful, there were just things I couldn't do. It was like there was some plan, and it was just like supposed to happen. And I was going to have to just get used to it. And I woke up and the tears started flowing. As of December of this year, I've been alive for about 52 years. Ike passed away about 13 years ago, so that's 1/4 of my life. For half my life, I didn't know him, but I had a good quarter of my life where I had the opportunity to know a good friend. I will have to say that I'm not over his death, and maybe I never will be. I'm not proud of that, but I just think it's something that simply is. The fact is, I think about Ike every day. What's worse is he never got to see me succeed and getting my books published, never got to watch my kids grow up like I did. In fact, my kids hardly remember him, as they were very young when he passed away. What is strange is that if I could talk to him, I just know how the conversation would go. I think we all know that people tend to respond or react in the same ways when you tell them certain things, and we just know it, and oftentimes they do it, but sometimes they surprise you. In watching the end of Smallville, I kind of realized that I didn't live to see the end of it. I think he would have been satisfied by the ending like I was satisfied. I'm not trying to say that this show represented our friendship, because our friendship got better through the years. I will say, though, it was something that was going on in the background, and it demonstrates that good things don't stay good for long. Now, that might sound negative, but there are always good things blooming, even when you don't look for them. And I wasn't certainly looking for a friend like Ike when I found Ike, but I was so glad I got to know him while he was alive. So yeah, I'm not ungrateful that he died, because I'm thankful that I had the chance to know him. This Thanksgiving, I want you to take a look around at the family you have, the home you live in. Be grateful that they are there, because you don't know when they won't be. Alright, I'm going to sign off now, and I hope to do a really good Christmas episode here next time. I'm not sure what direction to take, but if you like this episode, share it, and like it, especially if you're a Smallville fan. And leave your comments below. Maybe you disagree with what I have to say, and that's fine. You should. But hey, this one is dedicated to Ike, and I want to make sure you guys know that. So, but I think I've said it multiple times. Anyway, this is Mark Rollins from the Geek Church signing off.